Well, first of all, thanks so much to the organizers of the conference for inviting me. It's so nice to be back here in person, and not virtually, I will tell you that. And to talk a little bit about clinical applications of cannabinoid-based therapies, a clinical trial approach. I like to start with what I call a photo that tells the story, right? So this is my first day on the job at McLean Hospital, Harvard Medical School. It was a way long ago and oh so far away. Just kidding. But this is my way of telling you I've been at it more than a minute. It's been a really long road, and it's been an exciting journey for sure. I don't think I have to tell any of you that data regarding the impact of cannabis in general is largely derived from studies of recreational consumers, primarily observational studies of recreational consumers or acute administration studies. This is really important because it's not necessarily medical cannabis folks, right? Predominantly in the US, these studies have used products that are sourced by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, or NIDA, until recently. And I will tell you that despite the fact that California re-legalized cannabis for medical purposes in 1996, we have frighteningly little data on medical cannabis patients, particularly long-term data. It's getting better, but really, truly, very little data exists. As most clinical researchers will tell you, research really is the way forward, right? We need additional data to help reconcile what I would call disparate views and to clarify and elucidate the complexities of cannabis. We have this one word that we use, cannabis, or marijuana, depending on where you are, and we use it to mean anything and everything that comes from the plant. We certainly heard from Dustin all day yesterday, and many of us know it's a remarkably complex plant. Over 500 compounds. It isn't one thing. And it isn't one size fits all, or even one size fits most. So despite the importance of looking at real-world patients using real-world products and real-world scenarios, clinical trials are typically considered the gold standard. Why? Because you can assess things like dose response, safety, and efficacy, you can address placebo effects, and you can certainly control, at least try to control, for different types of bias. But I'm here to tell you, clinical trials are not always feasible or the easiest things to conduct. A quick, not so fun anecdote. In 2015, I received FDA and IRB approval for a clinical trial looking at a whole plant, full spectrum, high CBD, low THC, custom formulated compound for patients with moderate to severe anxiety. Wahoo, here we are approved. We're ready to rock and roll, right? 2015, good times. I guess I would say due to disparate state and federal laws and some other regulatory hurdles, which were pretty ambiguous, the study was ultimately put on hold by the DEA. We had a nice visit from a bunch of DEA agents, armed as they were, and they were lovely. And despite the fact that our clinical trial, once it was approved by the FDA, was then listed on the clinicaltrials.gov website that all patients across the country look at because they're desperate for anything to help them feel better, we had no ability to enroll people. This put us in a really untenable position, right? All dressed up, no place to go. We're approved by the FDA. We meet the safety hurdles, but we can't enroll anybody. The DEA comes in and says, listen, no problem. We think we can approve it. You just have to use a different product. I explained to them it wasn't like going to a candy machine and selecting Kit Kat instead of Snickers. It didn't work that way. It took a long time to actually formulate that product. So I was required to source and formulate a whole new product to address the regulatory requirements. Again, despite the fact that it was FDA and IRB approved. A quick 3 years after the initial submission and approval, we actually began the very first FDA-approved clinical trial of a whole plant, full spectrum, high CBD compound. So it wasn't exactly a quick and easy road. In 2014, well, let me back up. In 2012, Massachusetts was on the precipice of legalizing cannabis for medical purposes, and I scoured the literature. I've spent decades looking at the impact of recreational cannabis on lots of different outcome measures, cognitive performance, clinical state, measures of brain structure and function. I'm a neuroscientist. I scoured the literature to see what I could find in terms of the long-term impact of medical cannabis on individuals, and was stunned to find pretty much nothing. Really, absolutely nothing. So in 2014, we launched the Marijuana Investigations of Neuroscientific Discovery, and yes, it should have the word cannabis in its name, not marijuana. But states have medical marijuana laws, and it was an easier sell. This program is dedicated to looking specifically at the long-term impact of medical cannabis on things like clinical state, cognitive performance, conventional medication use and how that changes, quality of life, and a number of other measures. As my team will tell you, pretty much anything I can think of. The program uses longitudinal, observational, cross-sectional, survey, and finally, clinical trial models to do this. And we develop cutting-edge projects designed to look at the impact of cannabinoid-based therapies, both commercially available, you have to be creative, and custom formulated products for a range of indications and conditions. The goal is to harness the therapeutic potential while minimizing risk of exposure to cannabis. Mind is home to a number of firsts. I won't spend a ton of time on this, but I will tell you this is the first ever longitudinal data of medical cannabis patients in this country. It's a blessing and a curse to be the first. We're still the only. That's a shame. It's also the first to track cognitive performance. Thank you. First to track, we're here all week. First to track cognitive performance as a primary outcome variable. That also stunned me. First ever to collect neuroimaging data on these folks. That's been amazing. I hope some of you saw these exciting posters yesterday from my team. Investigational new drug, or IND, approvals for a number of different studies focused on different indications and conditions. And we've created a number of novel tools that are designed to really help us quantify actual cannabinoid exposure. When your folks are using lots of different product types, lots of different routes of administration, how do you calculate exposure? We figured it out. A number of other metrics too. I won't spend too much time. Anything that I don't have a chance to get into, you're welcome to come and ask me about after, or my Cracker Jack team. So I'm going to show you some data from Mind's first longitudinal observational study because that helped pave the way. Again, this study was designed to look at things like clinical state, cognitive performance, sleep, conventional medication use, measures of brain structure and function, which I won't get into today, and again, lots of other things in individuals who are interested in using medical cannabis, but before they begin treatment. Let me say this again. We see them at baseline before they begin treatment. This is critical. This is critical. We follow patients. Another fun fact, I was told, hey, listen, you'd be lucky to get these folks for 6 months, maybe a year, right? Maybe. Well, we had to keep extending our study. We now follow them out for up to 5 years because once they're in, they're happy to stay in. We see them at baseline, and again in person at 3, 6, 12, 15, 18, you can do the math all the way out. And patients can use medical cannabis for any indications that they're interested in using it for, and their choice of products. We have those products analyzed by an outside lab, and we also use certificates of analysis to help us with our quantification. Really important, patients complete these very comprehensive assessments. These are not remote survey-based studies where we're asking just a few questions about each thing. These are well-validated, normed measures designed to look at changes in things like pain, mood, sleep, quality of life. Okay, these are comprehensive assessments. Medical cannabis use, boy, do we put them through it. What are they using? Where did they get it? How much? How often? What's the cannabinoid constituent profile? What about conventional medication use? We're very interested in tracking how that changes over time. Cognitive performance, a full neuropsych battery, super fun for all of us. And where we can, neuroimaging measures. That's really exciting. We have a similar longitudinal study focused on older adults, those who are 50 and older. Yes, that's the definition of older adults, everybody. Those folks who they have chronic pain and they are all using opioids, and it's a group of those who either elect to use medical cannabis or those who don't. So ecological validity is critical, right? It's our ability to generalize findings to real-life, real-world scenarios. And our studies include patients who are using actual plant-based products. They're not using synthetics like nabilone or dronabinol. They're not. So that's actually really important. And none of them are using isolates, as it turns out. Not surprising. So looking at the actual products that patients use is really critical, again, for ensuring ecological validity. And we do monitor all of this information about their treatment regimen over time because they all influence study findings. Data from this observational study really helped inform our potential targets for our program's FDA-approved clinical trials. So where did we start? McLean Hospital, the oldest psychiatric hospital in the country. We are psychiatry 100% of the time, 24/7, 365. Where did we start? Anxiety. Anxiety. Anxiety disorders are still the most common of all the mental health conditions. I will tell you, fun fact, COVID did not make this better. And I don't know if you've noticed, but most people will tell you, I don't know, the world seems like it's on fire. So it's not getting any better. We know that anxiety disorders are underreported and unfortunately undertreated, and it's among the top 3 conditions that people use medical cannabis for in this country, right? Alongside pain and sleep disruption. So I'm going to show you data from 82 patients who completed baseline and follow-up visits. And if you look on the far left side of the slide, what you'll see is their average age is about 45. Long ago and far away, our work in recreational cannabis folks really spent a lot of time looking at the age of onset of regular cannabis use. And what we found were significant changes in those who had early onset of cannabis use because the brain was neurodevelopmentally vulnerable, right? They're under construction, half-baked, if you will. Not these folks. At 45, we're coming on the other side. We're losing what we had. So that's not as much of a concern. It's a really important fact. If you look at the bottom, you see duration of cannabis abstinence. Remember, I told you that at baseline, these folks are they're not using cannabis. Their average absence was over 19 years. These are primarily people who might have had a remote history of cannabis use, perhaps in college. If you look at the middle column, you'll see the top conditions that they report using for. Anxiety, pain, and sleep. What do you know? It echoes exactly what we see across the country, all right? We also had a group of treatment as usual folks. These are people with the same medical conditions or indications as our medical cannabis patients who are not interested in using medical cannabis. Much smaller group because we did have people who, convert over time. If you look at the far right, you see THC and CBD exposure. Another thing I was warned about, these people are all basically going to come to you and just look for a legal way to use cannabis and be high. Okay? That's what you're going to see. I'm here to tell you that's not true at all. In fact, they tell me quite clearly, I can't be high, I can't be altered, I just want to feel better. I'm not looking to be high. In our lab, we have a judgment-free zone. We don't care what you're using for, and the plant certainly doesn't care. The plant doesn't care. But it's important to know why people are using because the goal of use drives product choice, and product choice drives outcome. So here, you can see this is average weekly exposure to THC and CBD. That's not the entirety of the cannabinoid constituents we look at, but these are the two that people are often most interested in. But what you see is significantly higher CBD exposure per week than THC, underscoring my theory that no, they're not looking to get high. Why is it important to look at THC and CBD exposure in folks with anxiety? Well, for some, THC can be anxiolytic at low doses, but for many, and the majority, it's anxiogenic at higher doses. On the other side, we know that CBD appears to have anxiolytic properties. Going back to the early 80s, there were reports of CBD mitigating some of the negative effects of THC. We certainly see evidence from some clinical data really demonstrating clinical efficacy in populations. So, in our population, this is our longitudinal data, our green line will represent our medical cannabis patients in all of these slides, as they should. And the blue line are the treatment as usual folks. And what you see on the left is the Beck Anxiety Inventory, pretty common self-report measure of anxiety. On the right, the STAI, or the Spielberger Trait Anxiety Inventory, the state measure. And if you look, you see baseline, 3, 6, and 12-month data. And what you see is a statistically significant reduction in self-reported anxiety over the course of 1 year in the medical cannabis patients. Same is true for the STAI on the right-hand side. We do not see that in the treatment as usual folks, right? We really don't. So this observational data paved the way for our very first clinical trials of anxiety, and we actually had 2 studies. One was a cannabis-based, the other was a hemp-based, whole plant, high CBD containing custom formulated compound for those with anxiety. We recently completed that very first open label to double blind trial. We've published the open label data, the double blind trials in preparation, double blind data. It's basically a 4-week study of active treatment, and the dose is pretty conservative. It's about 10 mg per mil of CBD, but it's a whole plant, full spectrum product. It's about 0.22 to 0.26 mg of THC per mil. We actually know the amount of product that's used by each patient because we do bottle weights. We weigh the bottle before they take it, we weigh the bottle when they bring it back, even though we say 1 mil 3 times a day, better measure. It's a sublingual administration, and we have a matched isolate arm as well as a placebo arm, which is actually more challenging. That isolate arm comes from the same base that I use to make the whole plant full spectrum product. So how do we do this? We create these custom clinical trial products in conjunction. That first study had to be in conjunction with NIDA. Then we had some industry partners and cannabis chemists. Our consulting cannabis chemist is here with us today. We're delighted to have him. And I can tell you, it's how you make this idiot, horrible-looking sludge on the left-hand side into something much more palatable that patients will actually take and say, that's not too bad, pretty earthy, like that on the right-hand side. So at baseline, these folks, if you look at their anxiety ratings, all of them indicate moderate levels of anxiety overall. And what we saw over time was basically the study drug was very well tolerated. No serious adverse events were reported. No one reported intoxication, not surprising at that level. And on average, they were using about 3.5 mils per day, not 3. That's why we measure. That's a daily equivalent of about 35 milligrams of CBD and under 1 milligram of THC every day. Here's the data. So first with anxiety, again, the Beck Anxiety Inventory, the OASIS, and the Hamilton Anxiety Rating Scale. We see almost an 80% reduction in self-reported measures of anxiety on the Beck. The OASIS, over 70% reduction, and on the HAM-A, which is an examiner-driven measure, 82% reduction. Pretty striking, right? We also saw significant improvements in ratings of mood. This is the Beck Depression Inventory on the left and the Profile of Mood States on the right. 77, almost a 78% decrease in depressive symptoms. Again, self-report. And on the right-hand side, again, Profile of Mood State total is that total score. Lower numbers here are better. Almost 64% decrease. Pretty stunning. So speaking of mood, we hear that people are often using cannabis to improve their mood, but study findings are pretty mixed. Some show improvements, and some are showing a little bit of clinical worsening or increased risk of depressive symptoms. There was an interesting study in 2017 that looked at the associations between medical and recreational use and reported depressive symptoms. And what they found was that most studies that were focused on recreational cannabis use reported negative effects of cannabis on mood. On the other side, the medical cannabis studies actually reported better mood and a lower likelihood of depressive events. So back to our group, I'm going to show you the data. If we look on the left, again, profile of mood state, total mood disturbance, we're looking for lower numbers. On the right, again, the Beck Depression Inventory. Our results, significant improved mood at 3, 6, and 12 months of medical cannabis treatment relative to baseline. We do not see this pattern in the treatment as usual, folks, right? You see that? I mean, unbelievably clear. So these data provided a great foundation for a clinical trial focused on mood disorders. And we had some previous findings in patients with bipolar disorder who also used cannabis relative to those who didn't. For those who don't know, cannabis is the most commonly used federally illicit substance among those with bipolar disorder. It's second only to alcohol. I used to hear stories of patients with bipolar disorder say, you know, when I feel like I'm spiraling out of control, I use a little and I feel better. Other patients would say, I feel so depressed, I can't get out of bed, I take a little, I feel better. Really interesting. I actually wrote my first protocol for bipolar disorder in 2008, I think, right? Yeah, they're nodding. Yeah, 2008. So as part of this previous observational study, we looked at changes in patients with bipolar disorder, two groups. What I call pure bipolar folks, so bipolar patients who don't use cannabis, and a group of bipolar patients who do use cannabis. We gave them the ability to track their mood multiple times a day, and for the for the cannabis using bipolar patients after every time they used cannabis. And we did this for 4 weeks. And here's what we see at baseline. So the quote pure bipolar folks are the blue bar. The cannabis using bipolar folks are in the green bar. Prior to using cannabis, the patients with cannabis use who had bipolar disorder looked worse in terms of their mood relative to the pure bipolar folks. They looked a little worse, right? It's important to be clear, right? What happens, though, after they use cannabis? Well, significant improvements in their mood ratings, and they were actually better in a number of cases than those pure bipolar patients. So clearly there was an advantage here, right? So once again, back to the clinical trial slide. Mind actually developed the very first clinical trial of a custom formulated whole plant broad spectrum product to address symptoms of mood and anxiety in patients with bipolar disorder. This is a proof of concept 4-week open label trial. Why broad spectrum? Why THC free? I mentioned I'm in psychiatry, right? And that we're psychiatry 100% of the time. In order to get people to buy into this, right, you have to make sure that you don't destabilize patients. That's really, really important, and I can't tell you how much pushback there was about this in the first place. We know that findings generally demonstrate negative experiences related to cannabis in bipolar patients are likely related to THC exposure. So this was a way of getting people to actually say, you know what, maybe this is something our patients can try. So this is a sneak peek from the first 7 patients who have completed this trial. Amazing. I cannot believe it's finally come to fruition. Beck Depression Inventory, Montgomery-Asperg Depression Scale. It's an examiner-driven scale of depression. Profile of mood state all across the top. Look at those numbers going down over time. Beck Anxiety Inventory and the OASIS also going down. So, decreases on measures of anxiety and mood over 4 weeks of treatment. Really pretty stunning. We know that pain is among the most common indications for medical cannabis use. The NASM report in 2017 said conclusive or substantial evidence that cannabis or cannabinoids were effective for treating pain. But, reviews of trials focused on pain have reported some mixed findings. It's really an interesting question, right? Whether or not optimized products to target things like inflammation might actually yield better results. So, once again, we're back here. Pain is the second most common indication among our folks. What do we see? Not surprisingly, results suggest that our medical cannabis patients report decreases in ratings of pain over 3 to 12 months. Again, the treatment as usual patients are not showing the same pattern. Again, this numerical rating scale on the left, the pain distress scale in the middle, and the pain disability index on the right? You see these reductions. So, PAIN, a project assessing the impact of novel cannabinoid product, is our clinical trial that we recently launched. This is a 9-week, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. The population here are folks with primary chronic musculoskeletal pain that was intentional, and it's a TID dosing. We shifted many of our clinical trial study products a bit in terms of the constituent profile. This is a significantly higher dose of CBD that they're getting during the day. Whole plant, full spectrum product, again, with the optimized proprietary profile really for pain of cannabinoids and terpenes. We recently launched this. I'm happy to tell you that 2 people have completed. It doesn't sound like much. It's very exciting to us, right? We're psyched. We have 6 who are currently running. And we're screening people literally every day. So it's exciting. Additional trials at the MIND program. CBD for anxiety and agitation in Alzheimer's dementia. An ultra-high CBD product in patients with glioblastoma. And a novel cannabinoid product for folks with endometriosis. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of these. Anxiety and agitation are among the most common behavioral symptoms for those with Alzheimer's dementia, up to 70% of these folks. And there's only one FDA-approved medication to treat agitation. None specifically target any of the other behavioral symptoms. None, right? We know that despite preclinical evidence for CBD in models of neurodegenerative conditions, and clearly a fair amount of clinical data now supporting the use of CBD for things like anxiety, there really have been no human studies looking at the effects of CBD in Alzheimer's patients for anxiety or agitation. So this was an 8-week open-label trial in conjunction with the Geriatric Psychiatry program. It was a custom formulated full-spectrum product. We did this in conjunction with industry. Study clinician, patient, and caregiver all complete scales. And this population were older adults, 55 to 90, with MCI or probable Alzheimer's and clinically significant levels of anxiety. And we basically targeted about 45 milligrams of CBD per day, and again, a pretty low dose of THC. This is data from the first 5 completers. Again, the Beck Anxiety Inventory. It's important to keep these metrics the same so you can compare things over studies, right? Patient ratings, almost an 80% reduction, right, between baseline and 8 weeks. The caregiver ratings over 80% reduction. And if you look at the neuropsychiatric index that's completed by the clinician, anxiety, agitation, and aggression all reduced. Pretty impressive. Again, early days, but certainly enough to be excited about. Okay, WHIM, the Women's Health Initiative at MIND. I liked it because I wanted to say it's not just a whim. Anyway, this is still the first and only cannabis research program in the country looking at the impact of medical cannabis on women's health, right? We had started this particular program with a number of survey studies that were menopause-focused. We then did a quasi-experimental study, more on that later, of a commercially available product. We have a pharmacokinetic study of a cannabinoid-based suppository that's launching soon, and I'm very, very excited to tell you. We have a clinical trial of a high CBD product that's formulated and optimized for folks with endometriosis. We are recruiting and enrolling, and I'm happy to say I'm not sure how many we have currently. It's not too many, so I didn't put it on the slide. But it's exciting because they're signing up, so that's good. Other MIND studies, we have a number of other areas of interest, right? Oncology, huge unmet needs here. Patients will use anything and everything they can to feel better, right? Huge unmet need. Neurodegenerative conditions. Imagine the power of harnessing things like neuroimaging techniques, endocannabinoid tone measures, and looking at them over time in those with neurodegenerative conditions, sleep, and so many more. I'll tell you that despite notable advances in cannabis research, we certainly have a number of obstacles that continue to plague us. Most importantly, I think, the inability for us to directly assess commercially available cannabinoid products in clinical trials. I don't know how many of you know that. Probably you do. Products from a dispensary or purchased online can never be used in a clinical trial. Right, see? Huh, exactly. See, that's why I put this line in. Huh, right. You need an investigational new drug or IND approval to do it, and that basically suggests that you're examining the compound for use as a drug. You can't simultaneously be selling something that's considered a drug. Otherwise, you're selling an unapproved drug, which we don't ever want to do. Anyway, so some solutions, not that we do that, some solutions. You could formulate novel hemp-derived products that are not sold in the marketplace, or cannabis-based products from DEA-approved licensees, now that we have other ones other than NIDA, for use in clinical trials under an investigational new drug approval. Collaborations here are critical. You want to join forces with people who know how to do this. Those of us who have experience getting INDs, right? Look at the team, they're nodding, yeah? You can design quasi-experimental studies to assess patients who just so happen to get the same product. They all get the same product. I didn't give it to them because that could get me in trouble. But they all happen to get the same product, and then you follow them, and you compare them to people who didn't, or to prior to using that product. And for observational studies, you can certainly obtain laboratory analyses or certificates of analysis for actual products used by patients or consumers. Regulations do limit lab testing for cannabis products, for quantification or other types of testing, even contaminant testing. For terpenes, you can't use federal funds. You can use other funds. That's one of the solutions. But, fun fact, you can't legally send or transport cannabis products over state lines, so be mindful. And product analysis really is critical to verify label claims, and it provides so much really critical information to quantify specific cannabinoid exposure, which is particularly helpful for observational studies where patients are taking whatever they might want to take. So I will tell you, orange is the new black. As a redhead, I don't look so good in orange. If black were the new black, I wouldn't be so worried. But with so many gray areas and discrepant laws, I would tell you that research and industry and everybody really needs to work together. We all have different areas of expertise, right? Nobody should be reinventing the wheel at this point. And we need to pay very close attention to state and federal regulations as well as those of agencies and institutions. I don't know if you've noticed, but some of these things are changing, on the daily. It's always best to ask for guidance or come to those of us who have been doing this for a while. I don't want to be behind bars. All data from well-designed studies can help move the field forward, and each type of design really has strengths and weaknesses, and generally, these should complement each other, right? We need real-world data from real-world patients using real-world products, and knowing what works for them helps guide what we're doing in clinical trials. It's just that simple, but we need it all. So, at this point, I would thank all of you, tell you collaboration is critical. If you haven't considered collaborating, you should. Most of you here do, anyway. I would tell you that I could not do this work without my extraordinary team, about half of whom are actually here in the front row. So when you have questions, you don't want to ask me, you want to ask them, right? You probably saw some of their work. I thank you for all of what you do, because everybody contributing to this makes a huge difference. Patients really deserve the best information we have. It's on us, right? It's on us. So thank you for your time, your attention. If there's any questions I can answer, I think I have a minute or so to do it, so thanks.